Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdicus Dave, and today I'm joined by James Introcaso. How are you doing today?
Dave, I am so great. It's so great to be here with you, my friend. It's great to hear the South Jersey Philly accent back in my ears
Yeah,
because I've been in California all week and nobody speaks the way we do. So I'm excited to be here
they all
with you.
speak wrong.
They all do speak wrong. Yeah, yeah. Stop talking wrong.
Stop talking wrong and stop ordering your sandwiches wrong.
Oh, don't even get me started on sandwiches and pizza here in California. You don't know how to do it. I like that I'm starting by alienating most of the audience.
That's how you do it. You just walk in, you throw the gauntlet down right in the center of everybody first. So real quick, for anyone who may not be familiar with you and what you do, if you'd be so kind to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is James Introcaso. I'm the lead designer at MCDM Productions, which is Matt Colville's production company. And I write books about role-playing game products. I hire authors, I edit their work, all around a lot of currently 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons design on stuff. So that's who I am. That's what I do.
So do you still get a chance to write? Because that was kind of your thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A ton. So we make a bunch of different products. Probably like one of the things I work on the most is a magazine called Arcadia that we deliver through Patreon and you can buy on the MCDM store. And that I am the managing editor for. So I don't do a ton. Like I write a letter every month for that. That's just whatever I'm thinking about in the world of RPGs. Which is kind of fun because that's like not really a design thing. It's mostly me being like, what do I wanna write
Editorial. It's
about?
kind of an editorial thing.
Yeah, exactly. But then I do a lot of writing on our other products, right? Because I want Arcadia to be a space where authors can come pitch us ideas and like they can write about whatever they want. So I don't want to take up too much of the air in there and
Yeah.
have it because like I could write an article in every issue. I could write the whole issue if I wanted to. I guess that would be really weird and defeat what our mission is with
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? But I don't want to. I don't want it to be like James's magazine, so it's always his ideas, right? I want to hear other people's ideas and be inspired by them. And frankly, don't have the time to write those things, but I do love working with other authors and creating their stuff. But yeah, I'm currently working on The Talent, which is our psionic class, and that's huge. That's going to be a product that's many tens of thousands of words, and already is like in draft form, and we're testing it and that sort of thing. So I got to do that, and also if you read the Flea Mortals, right? We have a monster book on Kickstarter right now called Flea Mortals that people can check out. I wrote a lot of the preview packet for that. I didn't do everything. Matt wrote some, and actually Mackenzie De Armas, who is working at Wizards of the Coast, wrote one of the monsters years ago before working at Wizards of the Coast. And we had that monster in reserve, and we were like, well, we should put this in the preview packet because this is awesome. So like,
Yeah.
but I wrote like 80%, 90% of that packet. So yeah, that gives you an idea.
Yeah, and there's a link in the description to check out the Kickstarter if you want more monsters for your D&D game and how to make them not boring. There's a Kickstarter for that right now. It's already at like $60 million or something. I don't know. Some ridiculous, obscene number.
Yes, it's a thank you to anybody who has backed or spread the word or just even showed up to talk about this somewhere online, because it's doing very, very well. We're very, very happy. So yeah, and there is a free preview packet that includes goblins and the Overmind, which is our floating eyeball monster, and the Lightbender, which is a this giant cat that can create mirage-like images of itself, and the Corpse Collector. These are all things you can like drop in, and it's got minions, which if you played 4th edition are like creatures that go down in one hit, right? So you can send hordes of them at players, and they can like cut through them. They have special mechanics where if they gang up on somebody, they're more powerful, but you can also cut down multiple at a time. It's really fun. Companion creatures, right? Like an owlbear that follows you around, that sort of thing. and retainers, which Matt had in Strongholds and Followers. This idea of like a hero that follows you around, like a lower level adventurer who is your sidekick, and the player controls. And then this idea of action oriented monsters, which is really our take on legendary creatures. We sort of have revamped the way legendary resistance and legendary actions and action economy around those creatures works.
Yeah, 5e does a really good job of addressing it, but it's far from perfect. Like, still, if you want your big bad to be a singular monster, they're probably going to get whomped. And if they don't get whomped, then they're probably too powerful to fight the party you set them up for.
Yeah. Well, and it all depends on too, like, is your creature powerful enough is a big question, but then the other question is like, how many players are there, right? 4 players taking on a solo creature is very different than 6. And so within that, you can have a lot of swing of like, this dragon is a very satisfying solo creature to this dragon needs like another dragon with it for it to feel challenging at all. So, and everything in between.
that is for sure. I do love the art from the for the goblins.
Thank you.
I very much enjoyed the MCDM direction on the goblins. Who's in charge? Were you in charge of that, or was that somebody else?
That's a great question. So the person in charge of like all art at MCDM is a guy named Jason Hasenauer. Jason was a character and like level designer. He worked at Blizzard before he came to us. He was the lead character designer on doing stuff for like Heroes of the Storm and things like that. So he worked for Turtle Rock Studios. That's where he met Matt. Matt also worked at Turtle Rock Studios, and they made Evolve, and they just put out Back for Blood, and lots of zombie games and things like that. So he really knows his stuff, especially when it comes to creature design. And then we have 2 in-house artists that we work with. So one is Nick Despain, and Nick is also our art outsource manager. So he helps Jason find and hire artists and work with them. And then Grace Chung is she's just full-time art all the time. And
just churning out art.
Yeah. So Nick, between the 3 of them, they did like most of the art except for the cover in the packet that you see, and Jason is really like the one who has final say. But when it came to goblins, right, like he would get together with all of the artists and Matt and I, and we would say like, okay, we want to reconcept the goblin, and let's talk about it. Like, what do we want to? We still want people to recognize it as a goblin, right? But we also want to give it a unique look so people know when they see a goblin, that's an MCDM goblin, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of hard to do. So our goblins are a little more furry, right? Like they have like hair on their arms and stuff like that. And our goblins, they have more, instead of, like a typical sort of elongated hook nose, which certainly has some problems in like anti-Semitic things that can be associated with goblins. Our goblins more have like a snout that they just have a nose that sort of rests on, but the snout is bigger than their nose, and their nose is like, sort of runs the gamut in what you would find in human proportions, right?
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So that was, we had a lot of fun designing goblins, and also their feet. This was something that sort of came up last minute, but they all have this very distinct look to their feet, which we thought like, oh, maybe goblins are like arboreal, right? They climb trees and they can like run up cave walls and stuff like that because their feet are so cool. And you actually see a little bit of that if you watch Lord of the Rings, when they're in the mines of Moria. Like goblins are like climbing out like the girl in The Exorcist on the ceiling.
Yeah.
Right? And so we gave goblins speed.
You guys are doing like a splayed toe thing with the big toe.
Yeah, exactly. So we were like, well, let's give goblins a climbing speed and we'll make that happen. So it was really fun.
Yeah, like definitely, like, I guess like the iconic goblins now are, Wizards of the Coast and Paizo, right? And I think they have a look that definitely stands up to those, and they're all 3 of them are very distinctively different, and but as you said, recognizable as goblins.
Right, exactly. And well, thank you for saying that, because that's really what we were trying to do. And we talked a lot about, like, right, that people look at a Pathfinder goblin and they know that's a Pathfinder goblin, right?
Yeah.
And we wanted to have that for not just for our goblins, but also for the Overmind, right, which is clearly inspired by a classic D&D creature. And we wanted sort of, what's our take for that? So yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we've seen people complimenting the art a lot, which is great because the art team worked super hard. Like, there are concept sketches, tons and tons of concept sketches for, like, maybe the goblin looks like this, maybe our goblins look like that, maybe, like, and a lot of that may never see the light of day. It's kind of
Yeah.
up to Jason whether or not it does. So we'll see.
You just got to do a full-on goblin product now.
Oh, I would love it. I would love it. Yeah, it would be great to do something. Pathfinder has, like, their goblin adventure, right? Where you play goblins, and
Yeah.
and I think that would be a lot of fun. So yeah, we'll see where we end up.
I definitely played their Starfinder version of that, but instead of goblins, it's their Skittermanders.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was
that
a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and we totally did sneak around the ship by flipping a crate upside down and
Yes,
walking around
like,
inside the crate.
That's awesome. You were like Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid. Just
We were
sneaking
totally
around
like
under a
Solid
box.
Snake, yeah. No, I will say it does bring a little joy to my heart to know that you guys are stealing talent from the video game industry, because they've been sniping us for a long time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing is, MCDM, most, I think, me and Grace, that's it. Everybody else worked with Matt in video games at some point, who
Yeah.
works there, and most of them worked together at Turtle Rock Studios. So Matt was the lead writer there, and Anna, who is our chief operations officer, and Lars, who's the head of QA, and he works in production, and Jerry, who's the VP of technology. Like, all of these people were all with Matt at Turtle Rock at some point. And so it's really interesting the way they approach design, right? Like, I don't know that I've ever worked with a company that has, like, a dedicated full-time QA person, right? And that's Lars was, like, not just a person who understood video game QA, top of his field, right? Like, he was
Yeah.
running the QA department at Turtle Rock, and really, really knows his stuff. And so, like, the testing is just so much more robust, and we get so much more out of testing because of it, because of the expertise that he brings, but also because, like, they approach testing like video games, which is very different than the way many people approach testing RPG stuff.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me, because one, you're talking about an industry that has a lot more money to spend on those things, where, like, unless you're Wizards of the Coast or maybe Paizo, and now I'm Monte Cook Games, but aside from that, like, we're starting to get some more companies that do have the means, but before that, it's like a dude or a woman, right, like, in their basement doing this stuff part-time, trying to make it work.
Yeah.
And people are like, you play tested, and I'm like, oh yeah, definitely play tested it. The industry is changing and making it easier, and also bringing those experiences from another industry kind of really will help propel things forward.
Definitely. And, like, for us, I think some people in RPGs obviously view testing as a luxury, and I think that's a good take, right? Like, technically, art is a luxury too, right? Not every product has art, so it's what you can afford in terms of time and money and all kinds of other resources that you need to be able to test. You need people, right? Like, you need manpower. That's another resource. So I certainly understand that not everybody has the means to, but for us, it's like a key part of what we do. We try not to do anything without testing it and testing it through several rounds, like do a revision and test again and that kind of thing. But it does mean your products come out slower and more expensive as a result.
Yeah, well, I guess it was maybe Twitter where I saw a thread where someone was asking should your playtesters be paid? And I just kind of laughed and shook my head. I'm like, maybe, but also like when you're talking about a like an indie product that like you might crowdfund it for like 4 or 5 grand if it does really well, like
Right.
like you want to if you want to be able to make the thing as well, like that is really tough for a small producer. Usually it's like
Yeah.
your friends and you buy some beer and some pizza or something, right? Like I think is the start. And then as you build a community, like your community can help you. And then maybe if you get to a point where your company's a little bit more profitable, then you could pay for something like that. Like that seems like an extreme luxury.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, right? That being able to pay testers, which we have sort of different phases of testing, right? And our first phase of testing goes with contract testers who we do pay. They have a certain number of hours that they work each month, and they have a contract with us, and we pay them based on that contract, and they get like the draft of things after I am done with them, right? So either if I'm writing the product, they basically get it after Matt and I have gone back and forth a couple times. If it's an Arcadia article, it's after I have gone back and forth with the author a couple times. And they get paid because often I would say they test stuff that it's like I like this was not fun to test.
Yeah.
Right? Like this had enough issues that like I did not have fun doing that. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm glad that we were able to, right? That we at MCDM have the means to be able to do that. And then our next round of testers are volunteer testers, right? And they don't have a commitment of hours. It's like, hey, come test as you will, test this stuff within your game, read it and let us know what you think, right? Like that's always helpful too. And so because often that's how the internet reacts to things, right? Like they
Yeah.
don't sit down and play. They're like, I like that or I don't. And so it helps to have that opinion too, because that's going to determine if people want to buy the thing. And so though they're volunteers, right? They don't get paid, so even we don't have the means to pay all of our testers, but what we try to do is make that commitment light on them, and then we try to give credit where credit is due. We try to give people different opportunities and inside information and that sort of thing, which is valuable to people. And it's also, we pull people from our volunteer tester tool to be contract testers, right? And so it's an opportunity to become a contract tester as well. We'll see. We're constantly evolving and changing. I don't know if that's the right way to go, but we're just trying to explore it as we can, because I think you're right, right? Like what's preferable for a lot of designers is to play test stuff as much as possible, but especially if you're making a non D&D indie product, it really is a crapshoot. That could mean if you're paying everybody, you'll lose a lot of money. And also, asking people to come play a game for many folks can be a fun time, and that's a good
And
way to
some
do it
people
too.
really do enjoy like trying the new thing or being the first one to get a crack at it too. So there's a couple questions I'm gonna
Yeah.
start diving in for. Luke Edwards, what have you discussed in other live streams that you want to say now?
What haven't I discussed on other? Oh,
Yeah,
that's a good
I
question.
think Luke is specifically talking about the project on
Yeah,
Kickstarter now.
yeah. That is a great question. And I'm glad that we brought that up. So yeah, so Matt and I have had 2 live streams about this where we talked and everything. And I think people a lot of questions about like what kind of monsters are going to be in this book and that sort of thing. And we get to talk a lot about one of the things we're trying to do with this book is this is a book to replace your monster manual, right? Or it could be a book that supplements it, right? It can do either or. And I think we don't expect people necessarily to pick up our book and never use their core rule book again, especially because we may have some new monsters in it that you want to use. We may not reprint some old monsters that you really like, and that sort of thing. And there's a lot about 5th edition design that we love, right? Like we're designing in this space, and we have the advantage of now, what was it, 2014 that the monster manual came out, right? So now it's almost 8 years later, and we have the advantage of like 8 years of testing, 8 years of figuring out of like millions of people playing this game. We know what people like, what they don't like, what we like, right? We want to make something that we like and we're proud of. And so I am, in terms of like what we've talked about, I don't know that we've made that like super duper clear that you can do both with it. And so that's something that I want to get across, right? Like you can use it to supplement. If you still love your monster manual, you may still get a lot out of this book. If you want to replace your monster manual, replace most of your monster manual with this book, you'll be able to do that too. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting in there. And I think we've talked a lot about like we might do templates for the book. And we might do like environments for the book, right? We've talked a lot about environments. One thing that I would love to do. So Lucas, this is for you. And this is not a promised thing. I don't know, but like I'd love to be able to go through environments and say like, here are unique, graveyard lair actions, right? So if you want to give a creature that doesn't have lair actions, like an ogre zombie lair actions, cool, you can pull these in, and now when you fight the ogre in the tomb, there are some cool thematic lair actions that you can pull in. Maybe we'll give more than the typical 3 so that you can like mix and match. So that's one thing that I am hopeful we'll be able to do with environments that isn't in the packet, that I don't think we've talked about in any live stream, and I'm not sure that we're able to do it, disclaimer, but I want to do it. So there you go.
So do you have a list handy, or do you know off the top of your head the collaborators for the pre-release?
For the pre-release, it was mostly MCDM staff.
Okay.
I can tell you there were two. So in addition to the artist that I named and Matt and I, Martin Sabor, I believe, is the way that our cover artist's name is pronounced. Really good artist. Sort of can tap into that Frank Frazetta style. And then Mackenzie, who I mentioned before, also made some monsters. But then really important and key to the packet, and hopefully to the book as well, Laura Hirschberner was the editor of the packet and really helped clean up a lot of the language, particularly around new rules like minions and what we were doing with companions and action-oriented creatures and things like that. So and then also coming in and doing the good editor work of the stat blocks and things like that. Laura is top of her field, one of the best editors for in the RPG verse, and particularly in D&D 5th edition, and just a joy to work with. And so Laura is a big part of everything being readable and usable at the table. And then of course all of our testers, we talked a lot about how important testing is. They are a big part of making everything usable at the table as well.
Editors are the unsung heroes. Like you only know what they didn't fix, right? You only see what gets missed if something gets missed. But other than that, they're invisible. But
right.
so
it's
necessary.
Like one of those things where sound design, right? Like when you're watching a movie, if you notice the sound design, you either are like the kind of person who knows and loves sound design, or the sound design is probably not very good and you're mad about it, right? Like a sound designer's job is almost to be in the background and seriously enhance the experience. But if they're doing their job well, you don't necessarily know. So like if you read a good product, I guarantee the editor is at least as much responsible for that as the author, right? If not more. So in the sense that, and I don't mean me, right? Like the development editor on Arcadia things. I mean like people who are really getting in there and doing both development work and copy editing work to help the flow of the words sound good.
Super important. Alpha Stream wants to know any chance there will be a way to back through MCDM store to avoid Kickstarter.
that is a great
flow through us
question. So and a good one, right? Like I understand why people don't like Kickstarter, and it makes perfect sense to me. And you will be able to back through Backer Kit after the Kickstarter ends, right? You'll be able to get in there
Yeah.
and pre-order, which is obviously Backer Kit is a separate company, but they are still connected and obviously a partner with. It's like I was about to make a D&D Beyond comparison, but that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, but
It worked 2 days ago, though. 2 days ago was good.
2 days ago, right? It was a great metaphor. Um, but after at some point the backer kit will close and we will also be selling on our store. I
Yeah.
don't know. I think all pre-orders are going to be handled through backer kit because that's easier for our production team. I'm not 100% on that, but as soon as the PDF is available, you'll be able to go to the MCDM store and buy it as well, right? Like
Yeah.
pretty much the same moment backers get it, I imagine it will then also go up on the store like immediately after that. And great way to do that is to like follow MCDM on all of their various channels, sign up for our email list, yada yada yada. And you'll know then the moment it goes live if you want to avoid both Kickstarter and backer kit.
So Brian Smith is one of our regulars. Has some questions. Any tips on how a monster stat might influence how many action abilities they get in a stat block? Like a higher intelligence baddie might have a bigger menu to choose from in a fight.
That's a great question. So I don't think about it in terms of necessarily like an intelligent creature has more options, right? Because I think having being very quick could give you many options, right? Being very strong could give you many options, like, oh yeah, you could punch a guy, or you could throw a guy, or you could grapple a guy, right? Like those are three things a strong creature might be able to do in unique ways that you want in their stat block, whereas a smart creature might have a bunch of different tactical options, whereas a charismatic creature might have a bunch of different innate magical options, right? And that kind of thing. So I tend to think of it in terms of we have creature roles in this book, right? And we tend to think of it at what role does this creature fulfill. So if the creature is what we call an action oriented creature, which means that it is there to be like the star of a fight against the player characters. It is either fighting on its own, or that creature is fighting like at the head of a bunch of other creatures, and they are the star. Then those creatures get more actions. Typically, they usually have an action, reaction, bonus action, right? Like they have that full menu out. They have a couple of different action options. They have what we call villain actions, which are kind of our version of legendary actions, right? Which are instead of 3 or 4 little actions that you can do off turn, you get one big sort of dramatic action that you can do once per round off turn. And it changes, right? Like you have three of them that are different, but you can only use one per turn, and usually you can only use each one per combat. And so that's sort of how we think about it. Like, what role do we want this creature to fulfill? And we should give it some options. And we usually want each creature to have more like because of what Matt and I prefer when we're playing D&D, we usually want each creature to have like maybe either a really interesting single action option for like an attack, right? Or more than one, so that the GM can change it up, right? I like giving monsters some ranged options usually if we can do that, and then like, hey, maybe we can give them a unique bonus action or reaction to keep them interesting and kind of like, well, you don't want to give too many, right? Like keep in mind most fights last somewhere between like 3 and 6 rounds, and so if a creature has 18 different action options, you're never going to see more than half of those. So yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of makes it overly complex at a certain point as well. Like I know, like with so we do these character build guides, but we always try and like put an NPC with them. And and like one of the things I really love that Wizards of the Coast started doing, I think it was Curse of Strahd was the first time they did it, right? They took their NPCs and like they would give them special abilities that were thematic towards whatever that NPC was there to do, right? And I think you can look at monsters kind of similarly, but when we do our NPCs, we always do it that way. And I was so disappointed when Wizards of the Coast kind of went away from that, where I was like, it was one of the coolest things I thought they did in a long time. And then somewhere's around Dragon Heist, Mad Mage, like, nah, we're not gonna do it anymore. It's a noble, it's a whatever vanilla boring thing.
And what was great about that too was you could rip that out and use it for your own games too, right? Like so when you got the adventure book, you could say like, oh, you know what? This NPC is perfect for this other, right? The stat block is perfect for another NPC that I've created in my own world, or for another adventure that I've hacked apart and put back together, or whatever. So like, I love being able to have a lot of different NPC stat blocks, which this book is going to have a bunch because of a stretch goal that we just passed. So look forward to that.
Let's see. There's a bunch of questions now. Once one start is like, it's like uncorking the tab there. Let's see. Here's the one I was looking for. DM Guru 2. Furi's monster design included much higher HP across the board for monsters to give them a time to use their abilities. How is this best balanced in this book for 5e to help prevent bloated combats?
It's a great question, right? And I think if you look at 4E's design trend, like across, right, what was true in Monster Manual 1, by the time you hit Monster Manual 3 and Threats of the Nentir Vale, and those are some of those later products, monster HP dropped down and monster damage output came up, right? Like they became a little bit more glass cannony because people were like, oh, combat's taking too long, but we still want to cost players the same number of resources. And so I think that's one thing to keep in mind is how can you be effective for the time that we expect you to be alive, basically exist in a fight, if we're talking about creatures in combat. And so we keep that in mind. I would say like our two big things that we think about are, we don't want to make it too complex, but our stat blocks tend to look a little bigger sometimes, or even be a little bigger, because we want you to have basically everything you need to run that monster in the stat block, right? So we don't want to give you a giant list of spells that then you also have to be looking up, right? We don't want to even reference something if we can reprint it, right? So like one thing that, and I do this a lot in Arcadia, like the author will say, this has the same effect as the Fairy Fire spell. I'm like, listen, just put that in there. Put the effect of the Fairy Fire spell in there. That's open content. We can use it because it's from the OGL, and like make it so the GM doesn't have to say, okay, well now I got to get out the player's handbook, or I got to go on D&D Beyond and search. Like put it right there so that it's good for them.
Sometimes,
so yeah.
I just want to say real quick. Sometimes too, like even if you do that and call it something else, it makes it feel a little more exciting and new, even though it really is just a Fairy Fire spell, right?
Yeah.
We are kind of notorious for like, oh, this does the thing we want it to do, so we just rip that out and insert it into wherever to make it do the thing that we want to do, because also someone already made the rules for it, so you don't have to like... you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and like you said, you don't have to send them off to chase it down so that they can find it when they want to use it. It's just like right there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and there's right, like D&D, in just the core rules, you have this, like over 300 spells, right? And so often you'll be doing something and you'll be like, oh, this is this is the Fairy Fire spell. I didn't realize that I made it, but like this does basically the same thing the Fairy Fire spell does, or this does basically the same thing that the shield spell does, right? And that's because there's already all of these, every spell is basically a little rules exception, right? Like a way to break the rules when you cast that spell. And so because all of these exist, and then you've got books with more spells, right? Tasha's and Xanathar's Guide and the Strixhaven book all have more spells in them, and like so you'll often find that there's something that already does what you want it to do, and it's easy to take that and slot it in, but you put your own spin on it, right? So like Fairy Fire, cool spell. What if a creature had a breath weapon, and that breath weapon was a fairy fire breath weapon? That's cool, right? Like, we've put this new spin on it. It's
Yeah.
evocative. You can picture it. You can see exactly what's happening. And it changes like the area of the spell, the way that it's used, right? That whole thing. So it does change the tactics you would use to deploy it in many ways. And
Oh,
so
that
that and yeah.
that is
Go
very
ahead.
evocative. Is that something you guys are using? Because I love the idea of something using a breath weapon, breathing on you, and just like the lingering energy washes over you for however long, and basically it's fairy fire. It definitely sounds like something you guys put in there.
That's actually in an Arcadia article written by Kat Kruger. That was Kat Kruger's idea. It's a very good idea. And she put that together, and just, yeah, really fun, really evocative, right? And something that I think about a lot in terms of like, what a simple, elegant, and fun thing, and a thing that's going to make players go like, what?
So there's a lot of questions about the upcoming campaign in now North Africa. I don't actually know what that is, including has Matt Mercer committed to doing it? I don't think that's going to get announced here for some reason.
So there's no guarantee we're doing this. It is an ambitious stretch goal at $2 million. We'll play what the one round of the campaign for North Africa. MCDM will play. I'm not sure who is going to be in that stream yet, but the campaign for North Africa is like sort of an infamous strategy board game that is about like the campaign for North Africa in World War II. And what makes it very infamous is it's supposed to be like a very realistic, very tedious game where one round, like one, and it's two teams of people, right? Like it's one team of 5 versus another team of 5, and you're, one side is the Allies, one side is the Axis. You're trying to battle in North Africa.
James, I just want to say that all sounds terrible to me.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's a $2 million stretch goal, because we may not get there, and then we won't have to do it. So, right, it's one of those things where it'll be like, oh my goodness, we made $2 million, and that's like the sugar that helps the medicine go down of playing Campaign for North Africa. But Campaign for North Africa, then, so one round takes 10 to 15 hours. The whole game itself could take like thousands of hours. And supposedly, like, the legend is that nobody's ever completed a game. It's got this giant 13-foot map that you need to like spread out on the floor. It's wild. But yeah, like even in playtesting, supposedly, and it was years ago that it was.
I hate resource management games. I remember, it's funny because we did like a Christmas get together kind of all our gaming groups at Ted's, and we just decided to play board games.
Oh yeah.
And it, my brother and his girlfriend brought this one game, and a bunch of people were playing it. And then at PAX a couple weeks later, I then met like the person that made that game, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my god, I took one look at your game and I hated it. Like, and that's not against the game. It's just a style of game that I don't enjoy as a board game. I just find that tedious and not fun. It's like, I feel the same way about like Arkham Horror, right? I'm like, I played it once, that was cool, never again. There's like 6 hours. I'm like, I could have played so many other games in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, I'm sort of excited to try it out, but it does sound like more complicated, more tedious Risk, right? And Risk is not a great game. So it's, or I should say, it's not for everybody. Like for me, I'm like, oh boy, Risk, I don't know about that, but I do want to play this just because it's so legendary, right? It's kind of like when somebody says to you, you're at the bar and they get wings or whatever, and they're like, oh, this is awful, try this, and then you do, right? Like that's
and you're like, this is awful, and then you find someone else to try it.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, when your friend's like, ugh, smell this, and you're like, what? Okay.
So Dave wants to know if you know when the package will start rolling out for the playtesting.
Dave. Well, first of all, Dave, thank you. I'm a big Dave fan. Dave actually helped playtest the Beast Heart, which was our most recent class that has already been published from MCDM. So we will start putting out packets. Probably it'll take several months. So we I have a timeline together, but I want to make sure that we can meet it first before I sort of start throwing out dates. So it'll probably take a couple of months because our process will be hiring some writers, letting them write that first batch, me going back and forth with them to get it right, play testing those monsters internally first, and then getting those packets out to folks. So I would say at least a couple months after the Kickstarter closes, it'll take before we get that first packet out. But if you're interested in playtesting, right? If you want to see those monsters sooner, I would say head on over to the MCDM Discord. There are playtest pool channels where testers, we have playtest coordinators, and they will go into that channel and they'll say, I'm running a test for this, right? I'm running a test for the talent. I'm running a test for Flea Mortals. I'm running a test for Arcadia, and I need this many players of this time at this time of day and this time of week. So that's a great place to go if you want to see stuff before it's fully baked. You can head over there. So it'll take a couple months before the packets start rolling out.
So Adrian, it sounds like the road was taking off the list of zones. Where will there still be bandit or other human non-monstrous villains?
Great question. So in terms of zones, just to give context to what we're talking about, we have sort of divided the book into three categories. We have monsters, which are just sort of single creatures that can be found in maybe any environment, right, or a lot of different kinds of environments, like the Overmind or the Lightbender. And then we have bands, which are like our goblins, right? Like, so the preview packet has 12 goblin stat blocks. And that's because we didn't just want to give you one goblin, we wanted to give you a bunch of different goblins so you could make different encounters, right? And there will be other bands so you could mix and match creatures from different bands, right? Like we will have a human band. And so you could pull humans and goblins and go to the elf band or the dwarf band or the undead band, and pull things together and build different encounters that way. And then we have environments, right? That's the third one. And environments are not necessarily biomes, like forest or mountain. They're things like graveyard, right? They're things like ruined temple, places where you find different kinds of creatures that are threatening to adventurers. And so the road was one of these locations. But what we sort of found was like, well, we have like enchanted wood, right? We have evil swamp, right? All that kind of stuff, which are basically places roads go through. So that's why we didn't have it. There will still be some, because human is a band, because we have 35 NPCs in this book, you will see a lot of NPCs that you'll be able to pull and use. And we're also going to hopefully give some templates that allow you to take like the MCDM goblin and apply that goblin to any existing template that doesn't have a ancestry associated with it. So if you want to take that and make a goblin knight, right, and use the knight stat block in the monster manual, you'll be able to do that too.
Nice. When you're talking about all the goblin stat blocks, it got me thinking about the video we just put out the other day, and we just kind of did like a tongue-in-cheek goblin versus kobolds. And one of the things that the goblin's really lacking is stat blocks. There's 2. That's it. Where the kobold has at least like a half a dozen.
Wow. Yeah. It's one of those things where I think we're gonna have a lot of fun playing with different creatures, because we also want to make things different, right? Like how is a kobold different from a goblin, right? Like that's something we're gonna explore. And how is our kobold different from our goblins, right? So we want to make sure we're doing that and paying due diligence, but also that again, this idea of the art, we wanted the goblin to look like a goblin. We also want them to feel like goblins when you play them. And we want to make sure that, like, I don't know, let's say you're running Lost Mines of Phandelver. You can swap our goblins in for the goblins that exist in that adventure if you want to.
Are you guys going with your kind of like own lore and history for goblins?
Yeah, definitely. So we're taking a kind of broad Fantasyland approach with this stuff, right? Like that it can work for generally any medieval fantasy setting, in terms of lore. And we're taking a page out of many people's books, including Wizards of the Coast, right? Wizards of the Coast is doing a lot of updating of their monster lore. So like, we're very clear when we're talking about goblins that, like, humanity, right, in the real world, has a lot of people on the spectrum of good and evil in at all points, right? There are some really truly despicable people, there are some really truly great and wonderful people, and there are people all in between there. And so the goblins, when we say like, hey, you're fighting goblins, if you're good people, you're probably fighting goblins who are all the way at the end of the evil spectrum, because goblins also have that same complexity and morality scale in terms of that, right? Anything that is humanoid, basically, we want to make sure has similar moral complexity in the makeup of its people that humanity does.
So Monley, hi James. Question: will flea mortals have ratmen, ogres, and evil dwarfs, or any of the above?
Yes.
There you go. Boom.
That was easy. That was easy. Yes, as in probably all of the above. That's what we're working towards right now. So hopefully, if all goes according to plan, you will see all of those things that you just mentioned.
So, what is the favorite? What is the monster you're most looking forward to seeing, kind of re-envisioned or new?
That's a great question. So new, I'm really excited about, because we're basically going to let the authors take the ball and run with that. We actually already have some cool creatures that I'm excited about. That this came through. Matt was doing a live stream. He does live streams on Twitch all the time, and just chats with people there, and it's great. And somebody said like, "Hey, we have a death knight. Why don't we have like a war knight and a plague knight and a famine knight, right?" And so this book will have those things. And so in terms of original creatures, I'm pretty excited about them. In terms of what like we're remaking, I really would love to see some different high level undead. Particularly the Mummy Lord is one thing that I'm excited to like get in there and remake. And I'm also excited to see what the MCDM vampire is going to be like. So there's a lot of those are sort of where my passion is. But for me, we're also making like a giant kaiju monster a la the Tarrasque, and that's where my heart is for sure.
We've had many a heated internal discussion about money lords, not money lords, mummy lords. That's a completely different monster. The money lord.
Yeah.
You see, they're a bit of a glass cannon, right? Like they can do a lot of stuff, but they don't have very many hit points, and it's like one fireball and a bad saving throw, and they're just like toast until they resurrect and come after you again.
Yeah, exactly right. That they have this like vulnerability to fire and low hit points, and they have like a giant list of spells, right? Like all that kind of thing. I think there's a more interesting way to mummy it up.
Just watch the Mummy movies and make it do all of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. Brendan, it comes with a Brendan Fraser retainer that follows you around.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Hopefully one with all the different religious icons on them, just in case.
Right.
Enric Zero, I'm looking forward to the Giants. Are you making all the same types that are in 5e manual, or only some of them, some of the giant types from past editions?
So you'll see a lot of the same giants. I don't know if you'll see every single one. I think we might have in our outline. I believe we have like 4 instead of 5. You might not see like storm giant from us,
Yeah.
or that kind of thing. It all depends. But we do. Matt has like I would say for Matt, his answer about like what monster is he most or least satisfied with in the core rules, it would be giants. In fact, I know it is because I have done 2 of these live streams with him, and that's what he said.
Yeah.
And so we're very eager to get in there and do something cool with fire giants, do something cool with frost giants, right? Other than make them like immune to fire and immune to cold. So yeah, we should be. We have big plans for giants, and we should be tackling most, if not all of them.
So let's see. We've got Daryl T. Jones and Dauber's Ratkind have an entire society with roles from warriors to midwives, and the Drove creating a ton of different stat blocks. Is that mentality what inspired your approach to your goblins?
So sort of, right? Like we don't have a lot of stat blocks for goblins that aren't things we don't expect you to battle, right? So like we don't necessarily have midwives, for instance, but what we wanted to do was have a lot of different tactical options for you in creating a goblin battle, right? Or creating a battle with some goblins and some anything else. And so that's really what drove that idea, was like, cool, well, let's have a big goblin bruiser, right? Who players, GMs can bring out against the players, and it's like, what, that goblin has a great axe, what is going on, right?
Yeah.
And we'll have some snipers, right, that you can put in the trees, and they're shooting, and then we have like a warrior, right? Like a goblin warrior. We've got goblin minions. We've got, and they act sort of more in the typical standard way. And so that was really the idea, was how could we help you build combat encounters that are fun for you to build and to run, and also fun and interesting for the players. And the hope is that the tactics really are like there in the stat block, right? So that's what we'll see. Yeah.
Hear me out. MCD Productions versus Cobalt Press. Main event: Goblin Bruiser versus the Swobold.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know that I would dare take on the Swobold. It's one of the greatest creations in all of 5th edition, frankly. I love
Yeah.
Swobold.
Either right before or right after the 3 kobolds in a trench coat. I don't know.
Right.
So like with the goblins, did you seek to fill all those monster roles?
Yeah. So, and I think, we talked about bands earlier. Not every band will necessarily have that, right? Goblins are a super popular creature. They're super numerous, right? So they intermingle with other people. They when you go into a goblin cave, there's a lot of them. They're found in a lot of adventures. So we provided 12. Some other bands might have, 4 or 6 or 10 or whatever it may be. Goblin is certainly one of the most numerous that you'll see in terms of band. You'll probably see a similar thing for like humans, right? We'll probably have at least 12 humans, maybe even more in terms of human. So that's what we're looking at.
What is the thought plans for like the tier mix?
That's a great question. So, in terms of creatures we're making to like supplement or replace what is in the core rules, you'll see those hit around or at the same challenge rating, because, right, we want you to be able to run adventures and use these creatures. And right, if our goblins are all CR5, then that's not going to work, because that's not how they're designed in the core rules. So we'll probably have a spread similar to that. I love me some high level monsters, but we know that not a lot of people play high level D&D. So you'll probably see more creatures on the 1 to 10 range than you will in the 11 to 20 range, but you will see creatures in the 11 to 20 range. You will see some new creatures in the 11 to 20 range, which I know people who play in that range are always hungry for. And also, right, like a CR12 creature, depending on how many players you have and how tactically minded they are and how many encounters that you could put them up against a CR12 creature sometimes. So even if they're, level 7 or whatever. So yeah, so we're going to provide a good mix, but again, you'll probably see a lot of tier 1 and tier 2 stuff, less tier 3 and even less tier 4 stuff.
Highest challenge rating?
I think you're going to see CR30. I think our kaiju creature, which is Gosmok, which is basically like a big Godzilla type creature, I think is going to go all the way to 30.
So, what is your approach with the challenge rating? Because I don't know, personally, I find the Monster Manual's challenge rating to be kind of garbage. Like it just the numbers don't really work out, and I've found that I have a much easier time as a DM if I just eyeball the players versus the monsters than using the CR system.
Yeah, well, and I think CR is tricky because I think it's also based on this idea of like how many encounters you'll have a day, right?
Yeah.
Which I think I don't think a lot of people run D&D that way. I think I think people have fewer encounters per day generally than not. So what we're doing is our CR system will stick basically to what Wizards of the Coast has, right? Like because we want you to be able to use our monsters with theirs, and if we have our own CR system, suddenly it's harder to build
that.
encounters.
I would even say like they've kind of adapted with each monster book after the Monster Manual. The monsters got closer to being the challenge that it said it was.
Yeah, exactly. And I think our way of determining challenge rating for me is I know there are rules and tables for this in the DMG, but those things can change and often are not right when you compare them to official monsters. So I look at a bunch of official monsters, right, and I say like, okay, this is their damage output, this is their hit points, this is what their defenses are like, that kind of thing. And then I will say, this creature mathematically on paper seems to wind up around here. And then we test that creature. And one of the biggest things that testers look at it like, is the challenge rating appropriate, right? And so really testing determines the final outcome of where that CR lies, which I think is a big help because it is sort of ephemeral in many ways because there are things that can affect it, right? Like a monster can deal low damage, but if they're paralyzing player characters, they should probably have a bump up in their challenge rating, right? If a creature can remove your ability to fly, for instance, well, what does that do? How does that affect the fight, right? But what we will do, right, is we're probably going to include our own encounter building rules to make encounter building easier for the GM than what is currently available and easier to do on the fly. So that's sort of our approach to CR is make a CR that matches, but then give you an encounter building system that makes it easier to build encounters, particularly for groups that don't have 8 to 10 encounters a day in an adventuring day.
I think the multiplier really screws things up a lot, right? Because once you start factoring that in, it's like, when you're trying to design an encounter going by their rules, it's like, okay, if you have more than 2 monsters, all of a sudden it gets really wonky. But I know from my own personal games where I've used like hordes of monsters almost like a backdrop, and the players have no problem with it. Like, okay, I know like there's a high level cleric, I let them, I give them tons of zombies that they're just going to dust every round just because it makes them feel fun, and it's almost like a side thing that's going on in the background.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I think that's a big thing, right? We see that in fantasy movies a lot, right? Aragorn fighting a big troll while like the rest of the battle rages around him and that kind of thing. So
If you were to plug that in, it would be well beyond deadly. But then at the table, it's like almost trivial.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
man.
Dave wanted to know, how did the 20th level game go last night?
Oh, great. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so we ran a 20th level talent playtest. It went really well. We did not get through a ton of gameplay. We managed to use various spells and abilities to sort of skip to the end of the combat, right? Like it
Yeah.
started this level 20 game that Matt ran for the MCDM staff yesterday was a ton of fun, and we had a couple people in there who, everybody was playing a new level 20 character. Some people were playing pre-gens, so right, that always takes time. It's like, oh, I have how many spells? All right, hang on, I
Yeah.
gotta sift through this. I have how many class features? I gotta and so it took a while to get through combat, but it was epic. People were getting hurled through hell. At one point, this Tarask like monster had died, and the cleric cast resurrection on them, to bring this giant monster back, and was now like fighting people and stuff. And my character managed to convince this giant creature that like we're on your side and we're gonna fight for you. So like now we're all we're fighting with a Tarask basically on our side. It was dope as hell.
Nice. Did anybody mount the Tarask?
I don't think anybody mounted the Tarask yet. So we stopped mid combat. We may be continuing it just because we only got really through like 3 rounds. But certainly someone will ride a Tarask at some point, because we're also in a lava filled tunnel, right? So nobody
Yeah.
can touch the lava. And so it helps that the Tarask is there. They're immune to fire damage, right? You can easily ride them through.
Swim, boy, swim. So we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Dave, thank you really for having me on, because it means a lot to me and to everybody at MCDM that you're letting me on to talk about the monster book. But also, people may not know this. In real life, we are friends. We play in a game, and Dave is a great game master. I got to play in a Monster of the Week game that he ran, and it was a blast. One of the most fun things that I have ever done in tabletop role-playing games is getting to play that. Dave and I are now playing together in a Shadow of a Demon Lord game that our friend Vegas is running, and we're like sort of brother, former bandit, kind of, brothers in arms, not actual biological brothers.
Yeah.
And that's super fun too. So this human, this individual, great person, everybody. Dave Bryant, amazing. Thank
Well,
you.
thanks, James. You're going to make me blush over here. Thanks for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us today. Links are in the description. Go check out that Kickstarter. See if we can't make them play that North Africa campaign or not. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy, everybody.